this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be looking at a Sega Saturn game, which happens to be the first Sega Saturn game that I'm going to be doing a review on, and the game is called Virtua Fighter. Although this is not the original version of the first Virtua Fighter game, but this just happens to be the one that I happen to own. But the game was originally released in the arcades in December 1993. Well, holy shit, I just realized something. I was born in 1993 in December. I wonder if this game came out on my birthday. Probably not, but anyways. In more irrelevant news, it also came out for the Sega 32X in 1995, and the PC version was released in 1996. But as for the one that we're going to be taking a look at, which happens to be the Sega Saturn version, that one also came out in 1995, which also means that it came out on the same year as the 32X version. And all versions were developed and published by Sega themselves. Now, I usually like to talk about the story, but I don't think I will be able to talk about it on this game since, well, it is a fighting game and there isn't much of a story to begin with, so we'll just have to move on without it. But there is at least a good number of playable characters in this game, which there happens to be 8 of them. And these 8 playable characters are Akari Yuki, Hai-chan, Wu-chan, Wolf Hawkfield, Jeffrey McWild, Paige, Sarah Bryant, and finally, Jackie Bryant. And you also get some info on these characters like date of birth, origins, and hobbies. All that type of shit that doesn't really matter, but I guess what they're trying to do is just to make some character development. But one thing I will have to make a joke about is that apparently Hawk is also Canadian, just like me. Hey, we're both Canadian, eh? Yeah, sorry about that, I just had to do that and just make fun of myself. Anyways, let's take a look at the gameplay. And it's a 3D fighting game. In fact, it's actually one of the first 3D fighting games, which is pretty impressive. But you only use 3 buttons. And personally, I wish I had a bit more buttons to work with, but since this game was also on the 32X, which basically took the Genesis controller, which also has 3 buttons, I guess it works for that though. But with the Saturn though, there's a lot more buttons, and you would think that there would be a lot more that you would actually be able to do with it, but nope. But it's okay though, I mean, like, they're pretty easy to understand. But now as for the controls, and it's really tricky to explain how the controls feel since there are some ups and there are some downs. Like some of the ups, for example, is that at least the controls are responsive. And for a fighting game, I find that the controls are actually pretty easy to get used to, especially trying to do different combinations. But now as for some of the down parts of it, when you jump really high, but you also like go down really slow, so it feels like you're on the moon. And the other part of the control is that I find to be really stiff is the walking. But like when you punch and kick and stuff, it actually feels okay, so that's why I find it's like really weird and whack. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't really explain that very well, but I mean, how the hell can I explain controls like this? This is just like so weird. Like I don't think I've ever seen any other fighting game have like such weird like controls like this before. But now as for the graphics, well, what can I say? Everything looks like a polygon in this game. But at the original release of this game for the arcade, this actually was pretty revolutionary at the time. But since this is a Saturn port, you would think that the graphics would be a little bit nicer, and just a little bit more sharper, but unfortunately they're not. And another thing I do have to mention with the graphics is that I find a lot of the characters' faces just look really herpy-derpy sometimes. But the best example I can think of would probably have to be Pi's reaction when you pick her. I am going to wake you up to bomb. Yeah, I know, that's just twisted within itself, but seriously though, that's just fucked. But now as for the music, I'd say it sounds pretty good. Now, it may not be my favorite video game OST I'd listen to, but I'd still say it does sound pretty cool for what it is. So overall, the music is actually pretty good for what it is. Now, if you want to buy this game, it's actually pretty cheap. Unless you're trying to get the arcade cabinet, then that's pretty expensive. But normally I see it for around at least like $10, $20, $15 around, I don't know, it really all depends there, like depending on like the completion of the game, but that's usually when I see this game come out for. But for the most part though, it's really not that expensive, and I also do believe that the Saturn version is actually the cheapest. And I think I actually may know why, so let me explain something. Well, as you notice, this version doesn't have very many game modes, it actually only has arcade versus and, well, options, but that's it. Whereas the other versions actually had more. And in case you're wondering why there are missing game modes on the Sega Saturn version of Virtua Fighter, it's because this game was rushed to be released on the first date when the console was released. And I'm sure a lot of people know that when a game is rushed to be released either for like the date of a console or even just being rushed in general, you know what happens. Like let's take a look at an example as, oh I don't know, maybe E.T. on the Atari 2600. And if you're still not convinced, How about we take a modern example, well at least like as modern as I can be anyway, and that would have to be Sonic 2006. So overall, really, they did took out a bunch of shit out of the original game, which is unfortunate, but there was another version of this game that was also released for the Saturn. And it's known as Virtua Fighter Remix, where basically it actually has like all like the missing game modes from the other one, and also the graphics in this one are actually more sharper looking. I've never played this one before, but if I ever do find it, well, I think it would be better to own this version rather than the one that I happen to own. Now, if I had to rate this game, I'd probably have to give it a 5 out of 10. Now, the arcade version of this game is really fun, but it's a shame that the Sega Saturn version had to be a little bit on the poor side though. Although at least it is playable, and it does have some amusement factors to it, but for the most part, I think a 5 out of 10 is worth it there, because I mean, it's not great, but it's not horrible either, so therefore I think it's alright as it is. There's also many sequels to this game, such as Virtua Fighter 2, 3, 4, and 5, and a couple of spin-offs. Also, one interesting fact about Virtua Fighter is that their characters usually do show up in other games sometimes. And one example I will give is Project X Zone, where Pi and Akari show up. And I may take a look at the other Virtua Fighter games at some point in time once I get a hold of them. But in case you're wondering who my favorite character would have to be, I'd probably have to say Cajun the Ninja. Like, come on, he's a fucking ninja, you can't really go wrong with that. Anyways, this is probably going to be the end of the review, so I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching and commenting.